Welcome to Chapter 5, where we begin by understanding the foundational difference between natural hazards and natural disasters. A natural hazard is simply a natural event, something like a flood, a cyclone, or an earthquake that has the potential to cause damage. But it becomes a natural disaster only when that hazard actually results in significant destruction and the affected community is unable to manage the situation with its own resources. This distinction is extremely important, and yes, this exact concept has appeared in previous exams, so consider it a high priority point during revision. Now that we know the difference, let's smoothly move into the different types of natural hazards, because understanding their categories helps us understand their behavior and the kind of preparedness required. We start with geophysical hazards, which include earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, and avalanches. Landslides also fall under this group because they originate from geological processes. And remember, both landslides and avalanches being part of geophysical hazards have been directly asked in exams, so keep that highlighted. Shifting to hydrological hazards, these primarily involve floods driven by changes or disturbances in water bodies. Then we have meteorological hazards, which cover cyclones and storms events caused by atmospheric conditions. Moving further, climatological hazards include droughts and wildfires. Droughts are especially important here because they occur slowly over time and are considered natural hazards with a delayed onset. Exam setters love testing this point, so make sure it sticks. Finally, biological hazards arise from living organisms, pandemics being the clearest example. Once we understand the hazards, the next natural step is learning how societies attempt to prevent or mitigate them. Prevention focuses on stopping a hazard from turning into a disaster. For instance, building a plinth wall to protect against floodwater is a preventive action. This exact example has already been used in exam questions, so don't skip it during preparation. Mitigation, on the other hand, does not prevent the hazard itself, but aims to reduce the severity of the damage both to people and materials. Even though the need for mitigation is rising with increasing vulnerabilities, many communities still resist adopting these measures. And yes, this resistance to mitigation programs has also appeared as an exam point. Speaking specifically about flood mitigation, there are several important strategies you should remember. These include elevating or protecting electrical service panels, increasing culvert size to handle heavy water flow, placing barriers or sandbags around facilities, and relocating sensitive equipment outside flood-prone areas. These practical real-world measures are highly testable and they've already shown up on exam papers before, so keep them in your notes. Now let's transition into understanding structural and non-structural measures which form the backbone of disaster risk reduction strategies. Structural measures refer to physical constructions or engineering interventions designed to withstand or reduce the impacts of hazards like earthquake-resistant buildings or flood barriers. Non-structural measures, however, don't involve construction at all. They deal with policies, planning, public awareness, regulatory frameworks, and training programs that help communities stay prepared. In other words, they focus on behavior, management, and governance rather than physical infrastructure. This distinction, especially the meaning of non-structural measures, has been a favorite exam question, so mark it as a must-know topic. Examples of non-structural approaches include land use zoning, which decides what type of structures can be built in which locations, and insurance programs, which help communities recover from financial loss. Both of these examples have been cited in exams, so be sure to memorize them as they are. As we continue exploring disaster-related frameworks in India, it's important to understand the role of the National Disaster Management Authority, or NDMA. NDMA is the apex institutional body responsible for crafting national policies on disaster management. It was formally established on 23 December 2005 under the Disaster Management Act, marking a major step in strengthening India's preparedness. NDMA functions under the Ministry of Home Affairs, and this exact point, its administrative placement has been tested in exams, so make sure you note it clearly. The authority plays a central role in coordination, policy development, and ensuring that disaster management strategies are implemented across the nation. From natural threats, we shift to another critical category: anthropogenic hazards, which arise due to human actions or negligence. These hazards can trigger or worsen events like nuclear disasters, floods, or forest fires, something that examiners have emphasized previously, so keep that in mind. Within this category, we see societal hazards such as criminality, terrorism, civil disorder, and war. Industrial and engineering hazards include power failures, fires, and major industrial accidents. Even transportation activities can lead to environmental hazards, reminding us that human systems often create risks parallel to natural ones. Now, as we move into the effects of climate change, we begin to understand how global warming intensifies natural hazards. Climate change doesn't just warm the planet, it amplifies disasters. It can aggravate droughts, floods, and storm events, creating situations far more severe than before. This link between climate change and increased hazard intensity has already appeared in exam questions, so highlight it as you study. Additionally, the rise in extreme weather has serious implications for food security, another point that examiners have tested, especially when discussing long-term climate impacts. We now turn to the growing list of disasters driven by climate change. Increased rainfall leads to widespread flooding, especially in urban areas where drainage systems are already stressed. Storms become more violent, stronger hurricanes and typhoons now devastate coastlines that were once resilient. Heat waves stretch for days, pushing temperatures to dangerous levels and straining public health systems. Meanwhile, declining rainfall deepens droughts, reducing water availability for millions. Rising temperatures fuel more frequent wildfires, destroying forests and releasing massive amounts of carbon. Melting glaciers contribute to rising sea levels, threatening coastal regions across the globe, and as these disasters intensify, more people are forced to migrate, creating what is known as climate migration. This connection between climate change and rising social tensions, including in India, has been part of exam discussions, so keep it firmly in your revision list. Shifting now to specific hazards, let's begin with tsunamis. A tsunami literally means a harbor wave, a fact that has appeared in previous exam papers and should be memorized. These massive waves are usually triggered when underwater earthquakes shift the seafloor, displacing large volumes of water. Underwater volcanic eruptions can also set off tsunamis, causing towering waves that move rapidly across deep oceans. The devastation upon reaching coastal regions is immense. Cities can flood within minutes, buildings collapse, and the loss of life can be catastrophic. One of the key warning signs of an incoming tsunami is a sudden receding of the shoreline, giving only a brief window for escape. Because tsunamis can impact multiple countries across entire ocean basins, they are both globally significant and extremely dangerous. Cyclones form another major hazard, especially for tropical regions. Most cyclones cause widespread destruction along coastlines, a fact frequently mentioned in exam questions. Their formation depends on warm tropical oceans combined with moist air masses, two conditions necessary for the development of tropical cyclones, and yes, this has been directly asked in exams. You should also remember that hurricanes and typhoons are essentially the same phenomena as tropical cyclones. The difference lies only in regional naming. Cyclones revolve around low pressure systems, drawing energy from ocean heat, which intensifies their strength and duration. Their strong winds tear apart infrastructure, heavy rainfall leads to landslides and flash floods, and storm surges push seawater far inland. Homes, crops, and entire livelihoods can be wiped out, making early evacuation absolutely essential in saving lives. Now, let's move into human health risk assessment, a structured process used to evaluate the impact of chemical exposure on human health. The sequence you must remember, and one that has been tested in exams, is hazard identification, then dose response assessment, then exposure assessment, then risk characterization and estimating public health impact. This order is crucial, so consider it a high yield point. Beginning with hazard identification, we look at chemicals and determine whether they are linked to specific health effects. Scientists analyze substances, identify risks, and connect exposure to certain diseases. This definition of hazard identification has repeatedly shown up in exams, so keep it crystal clear. Then we move to the dose-response relationship, which examines how the level of exposure affects the probability of harm. Generally, a higher dose leads to a greater effect, and many chemicals have threshold levels above which they become dangerous. Characterizing this relationship is essential, and exam questions often highlight this concept. Next comes exposure assessment, where we determine who is exposed, how they are exposed, and to what extent. This includes studying toxicant pathways through air, water, and soil. The goal is to identify both the size and the nature of the exposed population, and this explanation has been a direct exam question. Finally, we arrive at risk characterization, where all the earlier stages come together to estimate the overall magnitude of public health risk. This step summarizes the hazard, the dose, and the exposure to communicate a clear picture of the threat. It also plays a key role in informing public safety measures. The purpose of risk characterization, assessing the extent of the public health issue, has been asked in exams and should be remembered carefully. Let's now turn our attention to one of India's most important environmental legislations, the Environment Protection Act of 1986. This act was introduced with a clear and powerful mission to protect and improve the environment while addressing every matter connected with environmental safety and public health. To understand why the act was necessary, we first need to look at the background. The original Constitution of India did not contain specific provisions for environmental protection. It was only after the 42nd Constitutional Amendment that environmental responsibility became part of the nation's legal framework. This amendment introduced the fundamental duty encouraging citizens to protect the natural environment and added Article 48A, which directs the state to safeguard and improve the environment. These constitutional changes were influenced by global developments, especially the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment held in 1972 in Stockholm, which emphasized environmental responsibility worldwide. Before the EPA came into existence, India had already enacted several important laws, including the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, the Water Act of 1974, and the Air Act of 1981. However, despite these efforts, one tragic event exposed the need for stronger, unified environmental legislation, the Bhopal gas tragedy of December 2nd, 1984. This disaster shook the nation and highlighted major gaps in industrial safety and regulation, ultimately leading to the passing of the Environment Protection Act 2 years later. At its core, the EPA has several key aims and objectives. One major purpose was to implement the decisions made during the Stockholm Conference of 1972, ensuring that India aligned with global environmental standards. The Act also empowered the central government by creating an authority with the power to regulate industries, issue directions, and even order closures when necessary. Another objective was to coordinate the activities of various environmental agencies so that efforts under existing laws could be streamlined and strengthened. The Act also paved the way for creating new laws whenever needed to protect environmental quality. A significant feature of the EPA is its strict provision for punishments. Individuals or industries that endanger the environment or public health can face fines, imprisonment of up to 5 years, or both. In cases of severe or repeated violations, imprisonment may extend to 7 years. Through its provisions, the Act strongly supports the concept of sustainable development, ensuring that progress and environmental protection go hand in hand. It also reinforces the idea that a clean and healthy environment is part of the right to life guaranteed under Article 21 of the Constitution. The main provisions of the Act further define its effectiveness. The central government holds wide authority to enforce environmental protection measures across the country. It can formulate nationwide programs, regulate pollution levels, set environmental quality standards, and control the establishment of industries to ensure ecological safety. The Act also authorizes inspections, testing, and scientific analysis of pollutants. It strictly prohibits the discharge or emission of harmful substances beyond prescribed limits. Additionally, it regulates the handling of hazardous materials, minimizing risks to both people and ecosystems. One of the most empowering features of the EPA is that it allows citizens to file legal complaints regarding environmental violations, giving the public a direct role in safeguarding their surroundings. Overall, the Environment Protection Act of 1986 stands as a strong, comprehensive framework that protects environmental quality in India. It ensures sustainable development, safeguards public health, and reinforces the nation's commitment to preserving the environment for future generations.